The brand new bridge between Canada and the USA, next door neighbours, huge trading partners, same language, easy peasy, except only the Canadians showed up for the opening ceremony of the bridge that they had paid for because Trump suddenly wanted a share of the tolls. That was July. That set the tone. This was today. $20 billion of tariffs imposed by the US, and this was the response today.
Those tariffs will have real consequences for Canadian workers, businesses, and communities across our nation. Canada must respond, and today we are, in a proportionate, targeted, and strategic way.
First, the economics. Pity Canadian lumber. There's so much of it. One of their main exports hit by 50% tariffs. Or Canadian steel, same thing. Then there's American bourbon, milk and plywood also hit dollar for dollar by 50% Canadian tariffs. The result, real economic pain on both sides. And then there are the politics, or should we just call it trading insults? The tone for the day was set by Trump. The United States, he posted, is giving serious consideration to changing the name of Lake Ontario to Lake America, and that we don't expect to be doing much business with Ontario any longer. That was a response to Ontario's Premier Doug Ford, who had called Trump a loser.
And simple as that. We're going to fight with everything we have. And you know something? I have more courage, more brains in my baby toe than he has in his whole body. So there you go.
But the tension started with Trump's second term, when he said that he wanted Canada to become America's 51st state. Thanks, but no thanks, was Prime Minister Mark Carney's response in the Oval Office.
As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
Mark Carney has become the patron saint of standing up to Donald Trump. His speech at the Davos Economic Summit in the winter was a blast of ice-cold reality.
But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
The sun may have set not just over that glorious bridge, but over a neighbourly relationship that has endured for generations. And if Canada and the US fall out, what hope is there for the rest of us? Well, the historian Michael Ignatieff is a former leader of Mark Carney's governing Liberal Party. He joins me now. Michael Ignatieff, it's a pleasure to have you on the programme. Is Donald Trump making Canada great again?
I think the country has rallied in an extraordinary way. This is an really unprecedented coming together. We're a divided country, a huge country. We speak a couple of official languages. But this time, Canadians are pretty well 100% behind the Prime Minister's determination to refuse this deal. And the reason is that it's not a trade deal. What this is a direct threat to the economic and political sovereignty of the country, and Canadians understand it as such.
What were the things that specifically led to this trade deal collapsing? Because things were going relatively well for some time. And then at the last minute, there was an intervention. Remind us of what that was and why that was unacceptable to your government.
Well, there were a bunch of things. There were a bunch of late add-ons. A potential deal was reached on Tuesday, and then we discovered that trucks weren't covered by the auto deal, and we make a lot of trucks. And then we discovered that they didn't like the fact that we insist on French language signage on all our products coming into the country. And then we discovered, and this is the most serious issue, that henceforward, Canadian economic policy towards Britain, towards Europe, towards China, towards Japan, in other words, towards exterior partners, would have to align with the American position. And that basically says you're now a client state and your independence is over. And at that point, Carney pulled the plug and the country was behind him.
Right. And do you think that that resilience and that opposition will continue even as the economic pain will inevitably set in?
I think this is a tough question to answer, honestly. There may be real hardship, particularly for small businesses exclusively dependent on the American market. But this has become existential. This is not show business. This is something that goes very deep in the Canadian psyche. And I think it means that Canada is prepared to put up with much more pain than the United States. It matters so much more to Canada than it does to the States that there's an asymmetry in our capacity to absorb punishment. And let's not forget that the Americans will suffer punishment on the other side of the border, because many of the key states that are in play in the midterm elections in November are close to the Canadian border and are directly affected by Canadian counter-tariffs. So this is going to put pressure on the president. And in other words, it's not as uneven a battle as it may seem to an outside viewer.
Indeed. I mean, for fear of sounding lurid, is it possible that this could get even worse and go from a trade war to something far more serious?
I don't think you can exclude any possibility with Donald Trump. I mean, I think we all have to understand, and by all I mean Europeans, Brits, we all have to understand we're dealing with a predator. This is not a guy who goes in to negotiate things which end up in win-wins for both sides. This is a guy who goes into negotiations where he either crushes you or you defy him, or if you appease him, you find next day he's got another demand. And this is why Mark Carney said, you know, American agreements are written in pencil. Part of the problem is you negotiate with him one day, get a deal, and next day it's gone.
Right.
So I just think this has large messages for everybody. This isn't just a Canadian-U.S. story. This is a global story.
Indeed. And we're watching it very closely. Michael Ignatieff, thank you very much for your time.